Hello guys, David Vos here, out walking behind the house. Yeah, nothing spectacular on the walk today, but I got some things I want to tell you, some very important things going around in my head. I got so much information over the last, couple of weeks, several weeks, that I've just been researching and putting things together. I find it hard to understand how no one's ever put all this together before. Not in the way that we're doing it. But it's really exciting. It's fascinating, and I hope you're enjoying the series. Don't let this video fool you. Just because I'm on a walk doesn't mean it's not going to be packed full of very important information that you need to put in with what we've been going. And maybe this will end up being the best of the whole series, but sometimes when I just get to walking and talking, I'm able to even talk better, but get some of these things, to the fore. But I hope you're having a wonderful day. Beautiful day here. It's just raining, thundering. We might have to run back the cabin real quick or something, because it might just rain on us. It's just been raining, pouring. Yesterday poured so hard for a few minutes I thought, man, the whole heavens had fallen. My dog's over there. They were. There he is. Where'd he go? Here he is. They're out there exploring. But man, guys, there's so much we haven't been told. Where do I begin today? I've been looking through the ruins, the old mounds and lines and things. I don't know why in this country we just don't talk about these things. I grew up thinking that these little old ancient ruins were just some old Indians a couple hundred years ago stacked some rocks, no big deal. It's not like that at all. In fact, some of the oldest petroglyphs and ruins and lines and animal figures and things on the ground are from America. I think there's one that's about 3600 BC, which is just about the oldest. There's one location they think is maybe 7,000. I don't trust all of their dates. I certainly don't know whether we can trust any of them, but we have to kind of go by some of their dates as a guide, because I've talked to AI and I've read up on it, and I know how they do a lot of this is carbon dating. I don't know that I believe in carbon dating, but maybe not. I don't know, but I'm going to find a way to understand this information without necessarily having to rely on their dating methods from other ways that we'll talk about. But so, remember where we left off there in Marietta, and we saw that cone, the conical center, and then there's the graveyard, and there's all these mounds and lines and a broad way that goes to the river. And they were very geometrical and symmetrical. St. Clair did a ceremony there with the other the brotherhood leaders. They called it Delphia, which was the brotherhood. What they were working on, they called the Capitolium, which is the capital. And it was a straight line from John the Baptist's grave his tomb at Mount Carmel, where Elijah was created the school of the prophets and defeated Baal and so forth. We talked about that. So we go across there, and along the way, that line just happens to cross right over Stonehenge. Well, they claim that Stonehenge is 3000 BC. That puts it around the date in our Bible of Nimrod, which, as we've talked about in other, we've been leading up to all this information. The Lord's been showing us all this other information. You might think, well, why do we need to know all this, Dave? Well, because not only is it fascinating, but it's going to come into play. If you've watched all the videos that we've been doing for the last, I don't know how many months, years really, but they all sort of, it's like a revelation. It just gets deeper and deeper. But we know that Nimrod's the guy. He's Osiris, and he's also Zeus to the Greeks. And he's the guy that got killed, and his wife Isis puts him back together again. And yeah, it's a lot of astrological stuff. But in our Bible, he's a real person called Nimrod. He built all these cities all around the world. And we always just assume that, well, he just built a couple of cities there in Babylon, up around Akkad and Babylonia, Assyria, Sumer, in that area. Well, historians say, no, he actually built a lot of the stuff in Egypt too. Because he was the guy that wore the clothes of the priesthood garment, same garment that Elijah wore years later. It was handed down to Elijah. Well, we're not going to trace all this. We've talked about all this. But anyway, Nimrod had the garment, and Esau killed him, beheaded him, just like they beheaded John, which is a symbol, a cult symbol that tells you that Nimrod, Osiris, is the same as John, who is the Lazarus guy who died from Bethany, or the house of On. And Jesus raised him from the dead. And another verse says that the disciples went around telling everybody that Jesus had raised John the Baptist from the dead. It doesn't say directly that he did, but see, that's how the Bible in the New Testament works. It doesn't make a big point to say that Jesus and Mary got married. I mean, there's not a line somewhere that says, and Jesus married Mary Magdalene. Not in those exact words. But, of course, the Gnostic scriptures tell us that was his companion. They used to kiss on the lips, and he loved her more than all the rest. But the New Testament tells us that he loved Lazarus so much he wept. Why? Who is this man? It was his father. Horus raised up Lazarus, Osiris. So we've gone through all of this. So Nimrod's a very important person. He was beheaded. That's his skull. Or maybe it was John's skull. Or maybe there was 2 skulls. Or maybe, it's a rite that they did in the Holy Temple. But the skull represents the king. And he's the one who holds the lineage and the garment and the priesthood, the Melchizedek. And Melech is king, and the Melechites in America that the Book of Mormon talks about is the king line that built all these ceremonial lines and things all across America. So it starts there at John the Baptist, his tomb, and he's the last holder of the priesthood. And remember also that these Knights of St. John, that once he was raised from the dead, he was told to protect Mary, the Holy Grail, the Holy Blood. And so he goes and he protects him, and there's other legends, and I, don't have off the top of my head as I'm out here walking chapter and verse, but there's documented evidence that the Templars believed that John was there in the Languedoc, and then he took her to protect her, and the jewels and the money and the gold and everything else. And they kept moving it around, and it finally had a location here in America. And it sounds completely ridiculous, but until you learn all the information, you'll see It's all very true. Cohesive, completely. Backs each of the stories, back each of the other stories up. They're all, these legends, all one. From the Brothers Grimm to King Arthur and the Round Table to the scriptures to the Bhagavad Gita to all of it. So, go in a straight line, you cross Stonehenge. Stonehenge, 3000 BC. This has got to be Osiris. So this is where somebody began building. But it's not the oldest, because obviously the Great Pyramid is the Pillar of Enoch. So, in our time, the oldest edifice has got to be the Great Pyramid. And that is from before the flood. And there's another place up in Turkey called Tepe or something, which they say might be about the same age. And all of these ones that are very old have formations and alignments with Orion, because Orion is Osiris, the Aryan man, who this is all of us, not one specific race. The Aryan man, or the Orion, is the son of man, the son of Adam, Christ, the firstborn among many brethren, that rises on the horizon in spring, or the dawn of the new day, which is an event prophesied to occur that will be in the last days. And there's this ensign put on the mountains to beckon the nations, and the final battle of Armageddon, and so forth. So they come over here, and there's a direct line from Stonehenge, Nimrod's, or John the Baptist's tomb, across Stonehenge, comes to Nova Scotia, and comes straight on down through New York and to Marietta, Ohio, which they were making as a capital. So I wanted to investigate all of this and look at all the other, because right in that area there's a lot more than just that one mound. I mean, in the same line as you're going along, before you get to Marietta, there's another mound, and it's called Moundville today. It's a little place called Moundville, and that's in line with Marietta all the way back to Stonehenge. Moundville's another place very sacred, and from this Marietta there is a triangle. You can get on Google Maps and see, and get your little marker and mark the triangle. Marietta is the eastern point of the triangle. You go straight across to a town called Newark, Iowa, I believe. And that is an octagon, another mound, ancient city in the form of an octagon, which is turned 90 degrees. And then you go south of that to Chillicothe, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. It's another mound city or something. And it has another octagon turned another 90 degrees. The reason for these 90 degrees, these octagon shapes, is that when the moon waxes and wanes, it comes up in a different place in the sky, you see. And so that 90 degrees is the furthest point north that the moon will come up. And the other 90 degrees is the place that it comes up where it's the furthest south. And so they're mapping the sun and the moon with these things. Now, one of those locations right there, it's the, I believe it's the Chillicothe one, has, and there's pictures that I wanted to show you, but we're out walking. So I'll show you those maybe in another video too, but it's a raised circle, like a ring. And then right off next to it is a square. The square has 45-degree angles. The triangle, the circle, of course, is a circle. And so if you square the circle, which is what the Masons have done, this is their ancient, secret geometry. Squaring the circle, petrified wood. I see a lot of petrified wood around here. Is when you are, it's not just, oh, it's math, it's fun geometry we like to do down here at the lodge. It has to do with deciding the solstices and the equinoxes to know exactly where you're at. So everywhere in America anywhere in the world where you see all these petroglyphs and ancient symmetrical lines and things, they're oriented towards the sun, the moon, the stars. It's about astrology. And all these animals you see, pictures of animals all over the rocks as you go. Those are, and I've researched it now. I know this better than probably anybody. I know more about all this information than anybody I know. And I'm going to tell you, this is not just my theory. It is a fact that all these little animals you see are astrological signs. And there are other symbols when you're walking along out through the desert too. Some of them are sacred spot, and if it's a sacred place, they'll have a sundial or a sundagon. And it's like a spiral, a circle of a line kind of in a spiral going around. And they have different ones, but that's the most common one. And it'll be placed on the side of a cliff, right where the sun can shine on it as it rises, where there is a hole in the rock or some kind of a dial, like an hour hand, that will cast a shadow or a light beam, usually a light beam, like a hole, precisely on the spring equinox. And there are other ones that they'll have for when the light shines in this area. It's the winter equinox, or I should say the fall equinox, or the winter solstice, or it's the time that the moon is making its move, and its highest point. But they have all this going on, and all these lines correlate to astrology. They had to know when their festivals were to be celebrated. And it wasn't just because this was the gods demanded it or they all be murdered. It was imperative to society. They had to know when it was spring, when to plant. I mean, when you're out here like where I'm at, there's an exact week, an exact day that you need to plant. And if you don't get planting right away, you don't have enough time to harvest. You have to have enough time, but you don't want to go any time before that because the frost comes and destroys your crop. So they had to know a lot of these things. They had to know when the seasons were. And it was for the festivals because they were keeping, it's like a school. They were keeping account of their history as they went, so they could remember. So they knew where they came from, the ley lines and where they came from. And the symbols and what they meant had to do with the plan of salvation. They taught their children when a young boy became a man, they took him aside and they did a ceremony. It was a statement saying, you're a man now and we're going to give you these responsibilities. Life was a beautiful thing. We don't have any of this anymore. We've gone to this deity-less society where nobody believes in eternal life. We believe in this science thing. The devil, right? So anyway, this is what they were doing. And so if you're looking at all the geometric information in America, just America, you'll see that the central place that every one of these places it was like a hub, was Cahokia, which is in St. Louis. Joseph Smith stood there and said that was Manti. And it's just a few miles from Zarahemla, which is right near this Nabu where Joseph Smith built a temple. And this is where the Mulekites' kingdom was. And sure enough, this place, right there at St. Louis, which is very close to where Nauvoo, Illinois was, and he built that temple, that was the capital of the ancient world. But it was not just, it's hard to determine exactly where the capital is. They had several places. They had like a political capital, a spiritual capital, and maybe an arts and recreation capital or something like this. I don't know. But one of the capitals was at Marietta, Ohio, with the graveyard where the bones of the ancient ones lie. You know, the sacred grave of the ancestors. But in that triangle, when you trace it, there's a certain number of feet, a certain degree angle, and you go over to Newark Octagon, and now you're tracking spiritual things. You're tracking the moon here. And then you go down to Chillicothe. I don't know how to pronounce that. Chillicothe. It's like, I think it's that mound city or something. Anyway, in this triangle, you're tracking the sun and squaring the circle, which is getting the square, or the 4 cardinal points of where the sun either gets further south, north, east, or west. That's the equinoxes and the solstices. And so in a sense, that's like a type of capital. It was where the priesthood was. This is what they did in ancient times. Because Heliopolis is the great pyramid, the center of the geographical center of all the land masses on earth. But yet, where the priests were, like for instance Solomon's temple, Amun-Ra, is down, I don't know how many miles south, on that loop, on the cross from the side of the loop that's Dindera, where in our Bible is called Bethlehem. On the other side of the loop is Luxor and Karnak, which is the temple of Solomon, or Amun-Ra. So they had outside the city, a mile or two down the road, another little place where they would house the priests, and they have a temple to the moon and another one to the sun. So it's not going to be one capital right in the middle, but there is a kind of a financial economic hub, which is Cahokia. It was the largest of these mounds, and they found these roads going from it, like there's a circle at Cahokia. There's a circle with a line going through the center diagonally. You're supposed to follow the road, the line. It extends out beyond the circle, and it goes to other sacred places up in Wisconsin. Crosses the Mississippi and goes up. There is a road that goes from Marietta, and they definitely can see the road. It's still there and embedded in the earth. A wide procession that goes from Marietta, which was at various times called different things, the Capitolium and so forth. And there's a road that goes from there, and each of them have this, a road that goes to the river, where they would do the holy procession from the waters of life to the central place where they would take their bodies and bury them and did their ceremonies. If they were at a graveyard, or if they were celebrating the beginning of the new year or something like that, it was different. But they always had these procession roads that goes to the river. And the river there on the Mississippi mimicked the Nile, the Gihon. We'll find later that the Amazon, because remember, Eden is the Gulf of Mexico. The whole Gulf area, Texas, Louisiana, Florida, Cuba, Bahamas, Venezuela, and that whole area, Bolivia and Peru and up around Guatemala and Mexico, and the Southwest. That's Eden. And that center place that's been removed is the Gulf. And we don't know if it was a meteor or what happened, but it sunk. That was Atlantis. So the only part that we have left is a very small portion of the land. And so they had trade routes, and they find jade and turquoise and other beautiful stones that are from Yellowstone at Cahokia, where they traded. They find certain commodities that come from Brazil and from Peru and from on the eastern coast, where they traded with the Molochites. And so they know that this was a central hub for trading. And they would bring all, but when they traded, it was spiritual as well, because they didn't just, it wasn't just commerce, and they didn't just worship a golden calf, right? They didn't idolatrize the system. Because remember, the golden calf had, several times, when it comes to Elijah, there was a basin of sea, a sea basin, that was held up by 12 bulls. And Elisha was laboring under the 12 bulls as some kind of a priest. Elijah comes along and throws him his mantle. Elisha puts on the mantle of Elijah, which is his priesthood, and overturns the 12 bulls, and the basin falls down and spills out. And then Elisha then is a different higher priesthood, where he's no longer working for the bulls. The bulls are the 12 demonic, astrological, carnal natures that we have to overcome. And they're holding up the sea. Now, isn't that interesting? Remember, the book of Genesis says there was a sea above and a sea beneath. The sea beneath, or the water beneath, is the refreshing water from the depths, lakes and ponds and rivers and streams. And so, under the law of Moses, you were baptized into Moses, into the sea, into the Red Sea. We're all baptized into Moses. So we were baptized down through the raging sea. And it's not drinkable. It's suffering. It's held up by these animal natures, the 12 zodiac signs. And you come into it, and you're baptized into it because you come into the death. It's a baptism of death. And you're incarnated many times, and you're under this evil deity who keeps you here. And you can't get out until you get through the curtain beyond the veil. You got to light the lamp and so forth. All this is very symbolic. When Jesus came along, he didn't baptize the way that Jewish people had been doing. Because remember, in the Bible, it talks about the purification bottles that he turned into wine. That's the same thing that's going on that Dionysius. That's a religious rite that's up in Syria. That's the widow's son that Elijah and Elisha raised up, that Christ raised up, the widow of Nain, or Anna, which is Diana, which is the same as Artemis, which is up in Ephesus. And so they had purification bottles, but you see, those were pure water that you could drink or bathe with. And Jesus turned it into wine. So you get the understanding that there's different kinds of baptisms and washings. John the Baptist came baptizing. That wasn't something that all the other Jews were doing. But he was baptizing in the Jordan. The word just means the rushing river. It was actually probably the Nile. And it's a fresh water. You could drink the water. It's a river. It's not an ocean. And it's not chaotic. It's just a flowing stream of life. So we're baptized into Christ. We're baptized into the spiritual waters within or beneath or within us. Now, the abyss is above. It's where the stars are. Right? And the beast, we ride the beast in this chaotic many waters. peoples and tribes and nations and tongues, emotions and chaos and wickedness. And it's a beast coming up out of it, because the beast transcends the very waters. It's the nature of the beast that you're being baptized in. And you've got to get control over it. And that woman had control over the beast, and she rode it out of there. And Jesus came down into hell and delivered her and killed the beast. So that's part of the whole, Greek mythology, Persian, all of them have the same teachings. It's like the Bible. And so Jesus baptized, and John baptized in the fresh water. It has to be a fresh, living water. It can't be in the sea. Because we're baptized not in the chaotic, mortal, carnal nature of this world, incarnated many times and dying. We're baptized to become living, spiritual. And we're immersed into the higher mind within us. We get that living streams of water that's bubbling up from our innermost being. So there's all these things going on. But you come over here to America and they have all of these ceremonial, geometrical things going on, these temples, just like they did back there. Who made them? Well, we've got a line coming straight from John the Baptist's tomb. We know who these people were. The other side that made Washington, D.C., these other cities, Philadelphia and so forth, that's their brotherhood. That's not our brotherhood, right? The other side had Adelphia, but these guys made a Philadelphia. Well, their line of cities and empires is bigger because they've had more time, because they've taken over and they've got the upper hand. They came from Paris because that's where they set up their lodge, and the Illuminati set up the highest Masonic lodge was there in France, in Paris. So from that lodge, you make a straight line to Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., and they made their capital. See, these are the two groups. But the good side goes through Stonehenge. That's 3,000. That's Nimrod. That's John. Same thing. Nimrod was beheaded. And so we're finding out that if you look at the dates, and like I said, we can't be certain about the dates, but generally, probably can be pretty certain, that all over the world, whether here in America, or Afghanistan, Brazil, Peru, China, Mongolia, Africa, all over Africa, all over Europe, all over Asia, Russia, Australia has it, Mexico. They all have these same geometrical, pyramidal, conical shapes, spaced at certain places, mimicking the stars and ley lines. And that would be enough to say that they're all connected, but there's even more than that. It proves it. The animals and the shapes of the animals and the kinds of animals that we find here in the Southwest, where I'm at, usually goats, and they'll have spiders and deer, snakes and turtles, lizards and things. These are the same exact animals that you'll find over in Africa. There's no question. It's like if you see the sign of Taurus and you see the sign of Capricorn. Capricorn's a goat and Taurus is a bull, and you know the signs and what they mean. So we know they're connected. It's astrology. And we know that it's connected to an original astrological wheel. And it's Israel. This is the original Israelites, from Nimrod, handed down to Jacob, handed down through all the tribes, and they've carried it all around the world. Now, it's changed a little bit. If you look at the Roman or the Greek, but it all goes back to the Egyptian. And these signs that you see here in America are the same signs that are in Egypt. And the dates aren't what you would think. They're, some of them are 1,000 years ago. Some of them are 2,000 years ago. Some of them are 3, 4, 5,000 years ago. All over the world, there are dates now. Probably the oldest would be Egypt, which tells us this is the beginning. This is the kind of a central location. For the most part, Egypt is the oldest area. But then you have some very old stuff going on in Britain. And we'll talk about that in another video as to why that's so old. But they crossed there and went to America. And this is where we're going to have to get in. I don't know if you guys will even be able to hear me because the wind's kind of blowing. But you've heard of Shambhala. Now, you've heard of Agartha too, but Agartha is not that old. It was written recently. Some guy made that up. But Shambhala is about, we start talking about Shambhala 1000 AD. That's not very old. That's recent. All of this story about Agartha, Shambhala, or this city of the Lord, the secret paradise, Eden, that's been lost, all of it was started by Joseph of Arimathea, the legends of Joseph of Arimathea, and the legends of John the Presbyter. Those two. And we'll cover them in depth as we go. Every one of these stories is about that. Francis Bacon's New Atlantis was him knowing that information. Columbus knew the information. I mean, off the coast of where, somewhere out past Australia, and then what is that, New Zealand, and a little bit further there's the Solomon Islands. You know why they call them Solomon Islands? Because this goes back to Solomon, King Solomon, who had all these mines where he would mine for gold and other metals. The mines of King Solomon. And Hiram Abiff was this guy who knew all this wisdom and built the temples and all this geometric wisdom that was handed down through the priesthood. And so when they killed Hiram Abiff because he wouldn't give up the secret words, some people claim those secrets left with him, and we don't have them since then. But that's not true, because we know Christ brought the mysteries and taught the mysteries, and the apostles had them, and Joseph of Arimathea had them. And he went and built these places. They came from Nimrod. These people were building pyramids and all these things. It's the ancient priesthood, back to Adam and Enoch. So there's magic books on Solomon. Solomon's magic. And people, modern Christians today, are scared of all of that, and they think it's all demonic and evil. But Solomon had power over the demons by means of a signet ring, which is another whole story. We've talked a little bit about that before, and I probably should start heading back because it's going to start pouring on me, probably. But I want to keep on walking, go to those cliffs. Wow. I'll have to do another day. So, all these legends, there are books written. Most of us have never even heard about these books, but all this knowledge is known, and all scripture is inspired, and the ancient colonizers and conquerors and voyagers and explorers knew about all this information. And it turned out it was all true. They found what they were looking for when they got to America. The ancient cities that are here. And they knew who built them. It's all true. It's all real. And the same animals and buildings and geometry that you find in America is also found in England. Stonehenge is exactly the same. You ever seen or heard about the lines at Nazca, Peru? This proves, because the lines at Nazca, Peru are exactly like the ones here in America. Most people have no idea, but the mounds that we have in America were, when we got here, accompanied with little animal shapes and figurines. Just like the lines at Nazca. From the air, you could look down and see these animals. And they were the same animals. Lizards and turtles and coyotes and goats and everything that you have around here. It's actually the same animals you see in Africa and China. It was a universal knowledge. But we know that the ones in Peru they can date them to 100 AD to 500, or to 400. And the ones in America are from 200 AD to 500. Exactly in line with the Mulekites in the Book of Mormon, too. Who were a king line, Melchizedek line that could build and had this Melchizedek knowledge priesthood. And it talks about how they built these magnificent temples in the Book of Mormon. Zarahemla is just a few miles, according to Joseph Smith, from St. Louis, where is this Cahokia. And when they first got there, they were all these animal shapes. Farmers plowed them over. Ain't got time for that. This sacred land's got to go, right? They plowed right over a lot of it. Some of the mounds still stand, but not all these animals. The animals prove that they're the exact same animals. The people from Peru, we can prove that there are commodities being traded from people from Venezuela and people from Yellowstone in California. They were trading their commodities with the people at Cahokia. And so it was a big empire, and the center of it was Cahokia at one point. Why? Because that's when the Nephites, after about 200, went there and met up with the Mulekites and became one nation, as Zarahemla and Manti, which is St. Louis. So this all fits, and we know it's all correct. And we know that they're the same people because the dates match, and they're the same animals, the same markers, the same temples, the same corridors, the same information. So these were the Nephites and the Mulekites, just as we can read there in the Book of Mormon. And they are connected to Stonehenge because we're talking about the guy that was beheaded, Nimrod, John the Baptist. This is their signal that they originate from this priesthood of John the Baptist and Elijah, Nimrod. And Nimrod's the same priesthood that you read about today with Christians. Although modern Christians have been told, oh, that's all pagan. We got to go back to the law and keep all the Jewish holy days. Oh, we ain't got no virgin birth. There ain't no Trinity. There ain't none of that. No, we're the pagans. We go back to Nimrod. Paul went on the road to Damascus and went to Ephesus where the Essenes were. To prove all of this, the Essenes were priesthood. The women were Melissai. And they were virgins and they were eunuchs. Jesus talked about eunuchs and virgins. And they spoke in tongues, the glossolalia. And they would dance and speak in tongues and have visions. And they had a thing called the sacrament. And this is why Melchizedek, in the Latin, it's the Rex Sacrorum. Rex is king in Latin. And Sacrorum is the the decorum, the decorations and the sacred. Secorum is sacred, the sacred rites. So the king of the sacred rites, the holy priesthood of the rites. Well, the Old Testament calls it Melchizedek. Melech is king. His name is Rex. And righteousness is the order of the priesthood, Zadokite. So the Melchizedek is the king of righteousness, but it is literally speaking of the righteous priesthood, the Zadokite line. It goes back to Enoch through the flood. So if you see these same things that you find at the Great Pyramid, which the Bible says in Isaiah 19:19 is an altar unto the Lord, at the border in the midst thereof of Egypt. And we know that that's a true temple. And when we see that the Great Pyramid was built on ley lines mimicking the stars and pointing to Orion, which is Nimrod, then you understand this is exactly what's going on here in America. The Kohelikos, or whatever they're called down there, just a little south of the octagon of Newark, in that little triangle we were talking about. That sun, their geometry with the circle and the square is mapping Orion. They have monuments that map where Orion is in the sky. So it's the same layout. They represent the same people, the same things. And this proves that all of this is going around the world. All these monuments and temples and holy rites all go back to Enoch. And there's another, of course, bad group that got started up, the apostasy after Christ, to try to kill Christ and the apostles and the true priesthood. But before Christ, these other bad guys were just known as the Torah. That's the amount of the bad guys. They were all kind of together and they were trying to figure out what to do. They all kept the Torah. Even here in America, they were keeping Torah. The natives were, there's the Decalogue stone right about 70 miles from me. Something like that, 80 miles. Where I visited and I told you that story. There's written in the rock, in paleographic Semitic language, with a little Egypt, a little Greek, a little Hebrew style in it. Paleographic, 10 Commandments. It can be dated to 107 BC because there is a star chart next to the altar with Yahweh written on the altar in the same paleographic Hebrew that we see it today. So the native peoples, the Lamanites, were still worshiping Yahweh. Now remember, the Nephites received Christ and they didn't believe in the law anymore. And so they understood Jesus was their Lord. But they had the same thing going on there, here, as the world. People transiting from the law to the new covenant and not understanding all of this. So you're going to find Yahweh worship all over the world, even by the same group. And up until Christ, they were all one group. It was Israel. Of course, there were splits, And the 10 tribes would go off and worship the woman. And the, Aphrodite and Artemis and so forth, they had temples to men, but it was a divine unity. But the Torah forbid women to be in the priesthood. They didn't even have a court for them. They couldn't even go into the temple. They were unclean. Women couldn't speak. So those were the two divisions. But up till Christ, it was just this argument over scripture or whatever. After Christ, the saints went to go establish his kingdom. They were given talents and they began to reign with Christ for 1,000 years. And during that time, the enemy made a counter priesthood. It really got developed with John Dee, the Kabbalah, and then it formed into the Aleister Crowley, CIA, mafia system, shadow government we have today. Communism, Hollywood. That's the beast that they've taken over. But they're not destined to succeed. They will fail. And the judgment is coming. Christ is going to return. And we're all going to be judged based on things we did in the body, whether good or evil. So, we've got to get out of Babylon now, because we're at the time of the end. But all of this that I'm sharing with you is proving to you that history is one. Oh, it's going to start raining. I got to get going. Nice little pond, though. It's a different pond. We were over there. It's a bigger one. It's raining on me. My phone's going to start getting wet. Yeah, we're over 50 minutes now, so I'll probably have to shut this down when it starts raining a little bit more. Yeah. I've just got so much information, I don't even know where to start or what to tell you about it. But that's kind of what we're going to be talking about. We're going to prove the lines at Nazca are the same dates, showing that it's the Nephites that came from that Mexico area, came up here. They were trading. We can prove all of this. And all this tells us is that Francis Bacon and the Plantagenet line is real. It came to America. We're building America here. A New Jerusalem. Kingdom of the Lord. It's holy. It's inspired of deity. Sanctioned and holy by the Lord. There's a purpose to it. We can believe. We can trust. He knows what he's doing. And all the signs that you see are to give you testimony. The Bible is a testimony. The Great Pyramid is a testimony of the Lord. In the midst and the border thereof. And all these other temples, and here in America. And we can prove that Joseph Smith was true, and what he said was true. He was a true prophet. And that they malign him when they say all these bad things about him. Because the bad side doesn't want you to ever know. They want you to think of some crackpot, some guy claimed to be a prophet in the middle of nowhere, and a couple of people follow him out in the middle of the desert, and they all died. Crazy people. Like Jim Jones. But that's not what happened. Joseph Smith was duly appointed by this priesthood, by Abraham Jonas. And he knew, because he lived 35 miles from Nauvoo, they were going west to build the New Jerusalem. This was the teachings that they handed down from Francis Bacon, the Rosicrucians, which was the order of the Knights of St. John. So, yeah, it's 53 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and go. It's raining too much. I got to put this phone in my pockets and get wet and try to walk a little faster before it starts raining too much. Well, guys, I hope you have a wonderful evening. It's a beautiful day here. Look at these flowers. I got to check these flowers out before it starts pouring. Flowers in the desert, right? Even white ones, I love them. Even if they're not technically flowers, they sure look like flowers to me. Isn't that pretty? Isn't that pretty, huh? That's pretty, Maggie, huh? I'm Barry. I'm Buffy. I'm Buster. Get him. See you guys. Lord loves you. Grace and his peace will be with you. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one. It's really raining.